still a little shaken up from this. I live in the outskirts of one of the largest cities in the Northeast, in a quiet section of a city with a small town feel. I go to the gym in the suburbs and was headed home after a pretty intense workout. Just ready to get home, pet my dog, and take a much needed shower. Now, to get back into the section of the city from the suburbs, there's this old 4-lane bridge that leads into a few of the main streets of the neighborhood. The lanes aren't separated by markings, but there are signs on the bridge, and everyone respects the 2 cars to a lane policy. As I was driving across the bridge, I stayed in the right lane to go straight across, as the left lane is a turn lane. As I reached the end of the lane, I noticed that the car at the end was over into my lane, about a foot, and I did my best to cut around it. One of my tires ended up a bit on the sidewalk as I made my way into my lane. I glanced over at this guy, didn't flip him off or act aggressively, but I'm sure my face expressed my thought of, "What the fuck are you doing?" The light turned green, and I went straight across. I noticed the car that had been blocking my lane, despite being in the turning lane, went straight as well. Looking at my rearview mirror, I could see an illuminated Uber light in his windshield. I continued up the semi-residential street, stopping at each stop sign on the way up, this car remaining behind me the whole way. As I was already thinking, this guy doesn't know how to drive, I kept an eye on my rearview mirror as I approached the main street in the area. As I was waiting at the light, I noticed that this guy had turned off his Uber light, and something in me realized that something was wrong. I'm not sure what it was, but the Uber light gave me some sort of comfort that this guy was working, and his conscious act of turning it off made me feel uneasy. As I turned onto the main street, I made the first left turn I could, and the Uber made the turn behind me. I was now on a residential street, but as I knew the area, I drove at a conscious pace, making a couple turns, heading towards the highway. The Uber pursued, his bumper about 1.5 feet from mine. Halfway down the residential street, there was no doubt in my mind that I was being pursued. Now, despite me having a very buttoned-up office job and a soft-spoken personality, I don't necessarily think that I'm a prime target for being chased. I'm a big guy. I'm between 6'5" and 6'6", a little under 220 pounds, muscular, and have a ton of tattoos. I'm sure this guy saw me as I pulled up next to him on the bridge, and from my glance at him, he looked older and much smaller than myself. While the thought of pulling over and escalating things did cross my mind, with the rate of gun crime in my city, that thought was gone as soon as it came. All I could focus on was getting to a safe place and making sure this maniac didn't find out where I lived. As I turned onto the highway, he followed again, cutting across several lanes and accelerating to catch up to me. I made the first right I was able to, then led him down a winding maze of back streets, his car inches away from my bumper the entire time. I wasn't paying attention to the one-ways, stop signs, or speed limits at this point. I just knew I needed to get away. All the while, the Uber followed, matching my speed and taking every sharp turn that I did through the maze of streets. Realizing that I needed to get back on a more populated area in case this guy decided to shoot me or hit my car, I headed back in the direction of the main street, spotting on the corner of my eye a parking lot of fast food restaurants that provided a shortcut to the main road. I blasted through that parking lot, the man speeding in after me, and I felt hopeless. If this guy was willing to follow me through all that, he wouldn't stop until he caught me. I weighed my options as I turned onto the main street. The police department was about a 10-minute drive away, but there were several lights and crosswalks between myself and safety. I decided I would head back through the streets in the direction, try my best to lose him as I went. I didn't want to give this guy an opportunity to get out of his car at a red light and hurt me in some way. I had to head in that direction, and I prayed that I didn't hit any red lights. As I rounded the corner of the parking lot, my worst case scenario was revealed. a red light with a car already stopped with opposing traffic. I drove opposite on a one-way to the left with my car ready to make a turn. I know it was irresponsible, but I didn't hesitate. I merged into oncoming lanes and made a left going down the wrong way down a one-way residential street. A few beeps from other cars around me rang out, but I didn't care. I just prayed that I had made an irresponsible enough maneuver to throw this guy off and created enough confusion to get away. I looked in my rear view and didn't see headlights. I drove to the end of the block of the one-way and made a few random turns down side streets, pulling into the parking lot of an apartment complex and turning my car off. My adrenaline was winding down and I couldn't stop shaking. I laid in my seat all the way back and called the police non-emergency line. The lady who answered the phone was entirely unhelpful and directed me to call 911. All I had was a brief description of the car and guy whose face I could not recall well. The police told me that they were just going to write it up as a disturbance. They told me to drive home as some time had passed between the chase ending and them getting to me. Being the ever paranoid person I am, I parked several blocks down from my house, changed my clothes in my car, put on a hat, and walked home, on the lookout for this guy in his car the whole way. I thought I saw his car turn left down another block as I walked, but I told myself that even if it was him, he wouldn't be able to recognize me outside my car. Now that I'm home typing this out, my large dog next to me and a drink in my hand, I feel helpless. I'm scared to drive my car in the city and run into this crazy person, scared of what he might do to me. I'm worried this guy will drive around and see my car, find out where I live, and try to come after me or my family in some way. I've never felt this vulnerable before in my entire life. I've never considered purchasing a weapon, but this encounter is making me consider it. All I can do is try to move on and hope that he doesn't get any rides in this area. So deranged Uber driver who chased me through the back streets of my city because he didn't understand traffic patterns. Let's not meet. I came here to tell you my story because there are a lot of people that go through these types of relationships and who are maybe still healing. But I also need some advice. I'm a 17-year-old girl, and when I was 14, I liked older guys. And not guys who were only a year older than me. I mean 3 to 4 years older. That's when I met my ex. He was 17 at the time, and he was a really sweet guy until he started opening up about his mental health and drug addiction. Don't get me wrong, I don't judge him for being mentally unstable, but he never took his prescriptions and just threw tantrums all day, verbally abused me, and overall didn't care about me. I was with him for 2 years until one day he finally blocked me, basically ending our relationship, and I never heard from him since, until 2 months ago. I came from school one day and looked into the mailbox because I saw an envelope. It was unusual for us to receive envelopes unless it was a bill, but it wasn't an envelope for bills, it was one meant for letters. I put it in my purse and went inside the house. I went into my room after I said hi to my mom and opened the envelope. There was no return address or anything like that, but my name on the letter caught my attention. I never received letters from anyone, and I was worried to see a signature that I recognized on it. I started reading the letter. Well, hardly, because the writing was awful. But the person who sent it is telling me how they regret letting me go, and that they want me back. I thought it was one of my friends playing a stupid prank on me, so I brushed it off and put it in my drawer, laughing about the situation. Later at night, I was about to go to sleep when an unknown number showed up on my screen. I looked at this screen confused because I rarely receive weird calls from unknown numbers. I didn't really want to pick up, but I thought maybe it was one of my friends trying to pull another prank on me. I picked up and heard heavy breathing. "Hello?" I said. No answer. Patrice, are you this bored that you want to pull pranks on me? Still no answer. Just heavy breathing from the other end. All of a sudden, I heard a voice. Who's Patrice? My eyes were wide open, and I hung up. I stared at the ceiling in disbelief, and I put my phone on silent mode and just went to sleep. I didn't think that this one phone call was about to be the beginning of my biggest nightmare. I woke up the next morning with several calls, all from that unknown number, and I got a little scared. I opened my phone and saw messages from the same person telling me to pick up and just talk to them. I tried to ignore it, but the calls and messages continued even after I got to school. When I was outside the school gates and smoking a cigarette with my friend, I got a call again. I answered and gave an upset answer. Dude, who the fuck are you? Why are you calling me? The person sat in silence for a few seconds, then said my friend's name. My friend heard their name and asked who the fuck I was on the phone with. You were with Anna, aren't you? Of course you are. I can see you. I looked around and didn't see anyone other than my other schoolmates. There were only 6 people around us and nobody was on the call or anything. I got creeped out and hung up. I think I recognized the voice, and it was my ex. I told my friend that he kept calling me and texting me from an unknown number since last night, and I didn't know what to do. She said that I can't really do anything about it, that I should just ignore the calls. As time went on though, I started getting more letters, sometimes even flowers right next to the fence of my home. For context, my ex was from another city, and I never told him where I lived. He knew what school I went to, but never which class I was in. Then I started getting a single rose on my desk once a week when I would get to school. My classmates told me that they never saw the person who brought me roses because they were there by the time they got to class. I was super paranoid. I started receiving pictures of me and my friends outside of the school gate. Sometimes, even when I was alone. I was shitting my pants whenever I saw that unknown number pop up on my screen with a picture attached to the message. I finally had enough one day and called his number, but he never picked up. I started texting him on the apps that I didn't get blocked on and told him to stop or I'd contact his boss and complain about his behavior and even make fake complaints about his service at work so that he'll get fired. He really needed the job, so he left me alone for a week, but then I started seeing him on the streets, in public transportation, and outside my school. Mind you, this dude lived in another country by the time we broke up and only came back when he started texting me again. I asked some of his friends about when he got back, and they told me he came back to our country the day that I started getting the calls. I could barely leave my house after I found out he knew my school schedule, and I always asked one of my classmates who lived nearby to pick me up with her car on her way to school. One day, I wasn't so lucky. My classmate who used to drive me to school was sick and couldn't show up, so I had to take the bus that day. When I got on the bus, I saw his blonde, wavy hair, and I froze. I literally wanted to cry and didn't know how to get out of the bus without him getting off at the same stop as me. In my country, we aren't supposed to talk to the bus driver while they're driving, but I had no other choice but to ask him not to let him out the bus. I explained the situation and he was thankfully understanding. He didn't let him off the bus. He was banging on the glass door and screaming to be let off, but the driver kept the door shut and drove off. I sighed in relief and started crying while I was waiting for the other bus to come. It's been a month since school ended and I haven't seen him after that, but I'm scared that he might come back when school starts. The police won't do anything about it, even though I started getting threatening letters 2 weeks ago. I carry a pocket knife with me, and I've even changed my number, but I don't know what else I can do. The story occurred a few months ago. There are these 3 abandoned houses, as well as 3 barns close to my house. They're all gonna get torn down here in the next couple of months, so my siblings and I thought, why not check them out? I had already checked them all out with my buddy, but wanted to do it again with my siblings this time, because why not? We had only explored one of the houses previously because there's a small window we could crawl through into the basement and another hole through the wall we crawled through to enter the house. Since all the doors are pretty much boarded up, there are 2 more houses we hadn't explored, one being really small and the other being huge. After some research on the internet, it made sense as it seemed that one of the houses was leased to multiple people, mostly around the age of college or younger families, who maybe couldn't afford to rent an entire apartment. The time before, when I was with my friend, we brought a screwdriver with all sorts of those attachment things that go on the end, so that way we could unscrew all the different bolts and then use a hammer for the nails. When we got there, the board was already torn off, luckily, even though it wasn't the week prior when we first tried to get in. We didn't have screwdrivers that time. Also, let's call this house the Red House, since it was a red brick house. To describe the Red House, it's like you connect 2 average double-story houses together. It was that big. I mean, we ended up taking an hour to explore it, but that's because we were looking around too. The time when me and my buddy explored it, it was pretty cool. Not too much graffiti and lots of stuff everywhere on the ground. We found old cheap purses, Pokemon and baseball cards, a bunch of broken keyboards, books, and old school supplies, plus a lot of other completely random things. There was even an old tanning bed that I think we discovered was from the late 80s. There were the occasional drug needles and pills, usually in the corner of the old bedrooms or in the bathrooms. This time I just wanted to experience this again with my siblings. It was night when my mother was asleep, so we could actually get away with it. I dropped them off in my car and drove a half-mile to a trailhead where I could park my car and my car would be hidden. I then rode my electric scooter the half-mile to where they were so we could go in. There was a gate that we had to go over since there was barbed wire, and I folded up my electric scooter and hid it in the tall grass. The road behind the gate led to the first house we had already been to, so we were just trying to go into the big one. From here, you had to walk pretty far through this tall grass to get to the red house. As we approached it, we finally turned our flashlights on and then entered the house. Last time, me and my friends were calling out to make sure no one was inside, but this time it was night, and I didn't want to risk anyone calling the cops if they heard us yelling near an abandoned house at 2 a.m. Regardless, it was a stupid decision. We made our way in and checked around. I think it's also important to note that this isn't the front door, it is the back door. One of the 2 back doors. The house is on a hill, so from the road, it looks like a 1-story, but on the other side, you can see that it's 2 stories. This back door is in the very corner of the house, so you explore from one end to the other. As we walked through, I thought I heard some light footsteps, but this is an older house. I just looked it up and it was built in 1964, has 7 acres of land, and is 3,800 square feet. So yeah, pretty big. Anyways, it didn't sound any different from when me and my friend first explored it, and it was night, so quiet sounds were extra loud. As we made it through the other end of the bottom of the house where the staircase was, and made our way up, I heard more footsteps, and this time, I told my siblings we should go. They didn't hear anything, but they were also under the assumption that we were the only ones there, and they weren't very cautious or aware, I guess you could say. When you go up the staircase, on one side, it leads to the garage, which is very small for such a large house. Again, probably because it's older. And on the other side, you go past a short hallway that leads to the kitchen and family room, with a lounge area. This whole area is super open and it feels like a lot of empty space, but it only covers around half the upstairs. On the other side is a straight hallway with around 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. That's when I thought I saw someone moving from one bedroom across the hallway to the other, from left to right, but my light didn't go very far since I was using my phone light. I started angrily whispering to my siblings who were already kind of close to the hallway which leads to where I saw the person, as not to yell, but to get their attention urgently. They ignored me, which pissed me off, and I quickly walk across the open area to try to maybe yank their arm until I hear something drop. In my opinion, the guy dropped it on purpose to let us know he was there, but after this next part, I don't know. Immediately, my siblings and I jump. It sounded like a bookshelf was knocked over or something, and since it was really loud and heavy, we could feel the floor vibrate as we were upstairs. It was now confirmed that someone was there. We turn around and start running to the staircase, which is pretty much a straight line. The bottom floor sort of zigzags around, and it leads to a hallway that goes straight to the side of the house. As we make our way around the zigzag rooms and make our way to the corner with the hallway, we start hearing running upstairs towards the staircase. We were already running, so we didn't slow down. We turn the final corner and make our way outside, where I run in a straight direction, and then to the left to attempt to hide in the tall grass, which also has a direct line to the other side of the huge grass area to where the gate is. I lay down, and when my siblings run out behind me, I tell them to lay down as well. We were maybe 30 or so feet deep into the tall grass when I see a dark figure run out of the house a few feet, stop, look around, and run into the small house next to this one, which is only like 50 feet away. I thought that the house was boarded up still, but it looked like he ran to the side of the house, where I guess the entry was. There was a large shed thing in the way, so I couldn't exactly see where he went, but I knew there was a barbed fence over there, so we'd have to run behind to where we were to follow us, as there's maybe a 20 feet wide gap where there's no barbed fence, which I guess is how vehicles enter. I heard his footsteps running around, but I couldn't see where he was. We started to army crawl across the grass, but really slowly, as not to make much rustling noise. We start crawling faster, but then I hear his footsteps stop, so either he ran away, or he stopped, maybe looking at us. I kept crawling on all fours since the grass was now tall enough to still cover me, and I was looking behind to see if I could see the outline in the dark, which thankfully, I couldn't see him. We started to hear cracking sounds, and it sounded like he was cracking the plywood boards. But it sounded like he was frustrated, as we could hear loud grunts. We just kept crawling though. We were maybe crawling for a good 5 minutes to get to the other side. Even if we were far enough for him not to see us, it honestly felt like a lot more, and every minute felt like 10. We eventually get to the road which leads to the gate, and at this point we stop outside the gate and wait for a few cars to pass before crawling through. I have my siblings crawl under first, and I swear I heard him running through the tall grass behind me. But as I made my way under and through and started running, I didn't ever look back to see if he was following us. Also, yes, I did get my scooter, which my brother already had unfolded and was riding away with me and my sister running behind. We didn't stop until we got to the trailhead, off to the side of the main road, where we threw the scooter in the back, jumped inside and locked the doors and pulled out. We drove off peacefully, knowing that this person was definitely homeless and could not get a car to drive off after us. We made it home safe and sound, and we did not speak about it at all near our parents. My siblings kind of laughed about it more after the first week, but it still scared me knowing how serious it was. I don't think they realized how dangerous it actually was. We survived though, and that's all that matters. I never plan on going back. This happened in 2014 or 2015. I'm a female, and I was about 20 years old. I'll give you some context before letting you know what happened. I was studying in a lovely seaside city in France, and everyone was cycling all the time. Cycling to school, to work, to parties. It was a very safe place, full of tourists and students. I lived and studied in the city from 2012 to 2015. Up until the event I'm gonna mention, I never felt unsafe and didn't hear anything from my friends either. In December 2014, my boyfriend took me to his engineering school's Christmas party. We were a large group of friends and mingled a lot. One of the guys from this group, whom I didn't know personally, left the party without anyone noticing. A month later, he was found dead in the harbor, and police never figured out what happened. I went online to check if there's any news, and it's still a cold case. I didn't know him, but I think about it all the time. Was it because he was alone? Did he fall? Or did someone push him? Why didn't anyone care to walk home with him? Needless to say, the city started to feel a whole lot less safe. But at 20 years old, I didn't have the same understanding of such things as I do now as a 30-year-old. My life carried on. A couple months passed, and at the beginning of 2015, a friend was assaulted badly while cycling back home after a party. He was found in critical condition, his body laying halfway on the road and halfway on the sidewalk. His head had been smashed on the sidewalk step, and his jaw was completely shattered. He was a big guy in every sense possible, not the sort of guy that you could push around easily. When he was recovering in the hospital, he couldn't make sense of what happened. He had no idea why he was attacked on his bike, and the police did not find any suspects. Two students my age in the same friend circles were brutally assaulted for no reason. I still cycled everywhere because I had no choice. I lived 8 kilometers away from my school and didn't have any other means of transportation. That meant I cycled approximately 16 to 20 kilometers every day, and I have been doing it since 2012. Fast forward to spring 2015. I am cycling back from a party with my boyfriend. I've had a few drinks, but I'm not drunk. I am just tired. My boyfriend is annoying me because he's not waiting for me, and the distance between us keeps getting bigger. Suddenly, someone jumps on me. He appears out of nowhere and kicks my bike to the floor. I've been cycling so much, and I'm so used to the bike that I let it fall between my legs, but I did not fall. I resisted and stand up. It's a man. I reach for my bike, which is now on the floor, with my left hand. I'm trying to get a hold of the handlebars. He kicks me, and then my hand. He kicks me again and again, but I'm already holding the handlebars. It hurts, but I'm lifting the bike. He says something, and I don't hear it. I see my boyfriend looking at me. He's a bit far away, but he stopped cycling. He's gonna help me. The man's gonna see I'm not alone. I'm standing there lifting my bike. It's been maybe 2 or 3 seconds since the man jumped on me. My boyfriend is looking at me, and then he turns his back. My heart drops. He starts pedaling away. It's the dead of night, and there's no one else. I'm on my own. The man keeps kicking. He wants me to let go. My hand looks blue, but my grip is strong. I think about the 2 other students. They give me strength. I think about my boyfriend. The sight of him cycling away filled me with pure rage. I use this rage. The man holding some kind of glass in his hand. I grab it with my free hand and I smash it into his face. I'm doing it. I'm furious. I'm getting the bike up. Surely the glass had alcohol in it because it burns his eyes. I have a split second to launch myself and start pedaling away. He couldn't reach my hand anymore, so he kicked the bike one more time. I stand strong on the pedal. He tries to chase me, but I'm faster. I pedal until I can no longer breathe. I pedal until I feel numb. That night, I know I escaped something terrible. Due to the stress, I can't describe the man. I'll never know for sure if my experience was linked with the other attacks. However, we were all walking and cycling on the same route. 10 years later, I can remember the look on my boyfriend's face when he turned his back on me. Let's never meet either of these 2 men again. My friend and I'll call him Robert, had just spent a day in the city a few hours away from our own. We had just spent a day at an event in which we both participated in, and we had a blast. After the event, we decided to go out and get dinner with a group of our friends, and ended up staying in the city almost until midnight, before we decided that we probably should get going. The drive home was very uneventful for most of the way home. The roads in between the two cities were very rural and only had a few small towns between the two. Since it was dark, we spent most of the time driving, looking out for animals that may run out into the road while chatting with each other. As we got fairly close to Robert's house, we saw a car parked on the opposite side of the road, facing the wrong way, and a man walking around on the next side of the road. The car in front of us just happened to be an ambulance, which stopped to try to help the man. As we drove past, I made eye contact with him, and we just continued on our way, thinking nothing of what just happened. We drove for another 20 to 30 minutes before turning onto an access road to get to Robert's house. As we got further up the road, we noticed another car had turned on the road further behind us. Robert lives in a gated community, so we had turned onto the driveway so we could get through the gate. This is when we noticed that the car that had turned before had turned again and was right behind us. As we pulled up to the gate, Robert opened it and drove through. The car behind us also managed to make it through just before the gate closed. Neither of us really had any thought that we were being followed until this point, but even then we joked about it. We then drove for a while inside this neighborhood, which is fairly large, and noticed the car was still behind us. The route we took was a large curve, so we figured he should have had to turn off by now. As we got close to his house, we decided to keep on going, as the road would loop around and confirm that we were being followed. At this point, we called my friend's dad, who had just watched us drive by with his car behind us. As we came around the loop, we had come to the realization that we were actually being followed. Robert then started driving much quicker through the neighborhood, and the car behind us also picked up speed. We were going about 50 to 60 miles on this fairly small road, but the other car kept up. We drove for a while before we decided to head to the front gate, which had a 24-hour security guard. We left the neighborhood, pulled a U-turn back to the front gate. We were still driving fast at this point, and to anyone it should have been apparent that we were being chased. As we came back to the front gate, my friend was able to open it in a way we couldn't be followed. But as we turned the corner, we saw the gate opening, and the car that was following us drove in. This is where we made a huge mistake. We turned down a road without realizing it's a cul-de-sac. As soon as we noticed our mistake, Robert was able to flip his car around so we could get out of there. But as we drove by the car, I made eye contact with the driver, but could barely see his face. When we turned out of the cul-de-sac, we turned off the lights and booked it. We finally had managed to shake him and get to Robert's house. We waited at Robert's house for the police to arrive, and shortly after the officer had arrived, he got a call on the radio and booked it to his car. A few minutes later, 2 more police showed up, and we were informed that they found the car. The man was the same guy that we passed on the side of the street around an hour earlier. When the police first made contact with him, he refused to speak to them and didn't look like he was in the right state of mind. As the traffic stop proceeded, he began threatening the officers. We later found out that he was a mentally ill and unstable veteran from a couple states over, and he had no reason to be anywhere close to where we were. The man had broken the back gate when he followed us in. The worst of all this is the guy at the front gate, whose only job was to not let people in if they didn't have a fob, without stopping at his booth, let the guy in after he saw us speed past him. He was quickly fired by the security company. Looking back, there's only one thing I would have changed. I would have called the police sooner, but the adrenaline in the moment clouded our judgment. I'm a 29-year-old woman. I've lived in a big city all my life, but at the beginning of April, I moved to a medium-sized town, about an hour away from the big city, along with my sister and our 4 pets. This happened after a month of living here. My sister was preparing for her final presentation for her arts undergrad, which was going to be shown in the city, so she had to spend the whole day there to make her preparations. I was left home alone with our cats and dogs, so in the early evening, I decided to go for a long walk with my 2 dogs We walked for like an hour, but about 5 minutes away from our home, as we were headed back, I saw a man knocking on a door about a block away. I thought he looked a bit weird because he would knock on the door, look around, then knock on the door, look around again. But he didn't look dangerous, so I just kept walking, since I had to pass him to take the street that would take me to my house. When I was about 10 meters away, he looked my way and started walking towards me. He was tall and slender and was carrying what looked to be a box of candy. He asked me if I had any coins to spare. I told him, "Sorry mate, I only have my dog's poopy bags. Have a good one." And I was ready to keep walking when he saw one of my tattoos and stopped me. For context, I have tattoos. I'm not heavily tatted, but I have several on my arms and legs, and since I was wearing shorts, the ones on my legs were visible. This specific one he was looking at was a ghost woman in a traditional Japanese style. As he stopped me, he said, "That's a really cool tattoo. Would you give it to me?" I laughed uncomfortably, thinking he was joking, but he was dead serious, just staring and blinking at my tattoo. He then continued talking. "No? So you're just gonna let the maggots eat it? Such a shame. It'd be better if a person ate it." At this point, he raised his face and looked me straight in the eyes with a very flat smile that seemed to be an attempt to be friendly, but it only made me feel even more uncomfortable. He then asked me for my name, and not wanting to antagonize him, I gave him a fake one. Let's say it was Regina. He then asked me if I lived in town, to which I lied and said I was from the big city and just visiting. He then told me that he used to live in the city too, that he lived on the streets downtown. He told me that he used to rap on the buses to get money, and just out of the blue started rapping about me, still looking me straight in the eyes. He rapped about how I was very pretty, how amazing my tattoos are, and in his rap he said my name was Lorena. I corrected him and said my name was Regina and not Lorena, since I had a suspicion that he realized I'd given him a fake name and was trying to test me. He just smiled and nodded. He then asked me if I'd give him my number. I said that me and my dogs had to go home, that we were expected. He pointed at a butcher shop a block away and told me that we could sit over there while I gave him my number, that it wouldn't take long. But I told him I couldn't, that the one waiting for me at home was my boyfriend. But I was lying again, since I was home alone. His smile faded a bit, and he just said, "Well, that sucks." I wished him a good evening and turned around to leave, only for him to drop on his knees and grab my leg with both hands. He started caressing my tattoo while whispering, "It's really a goddamn cool tattoo." My dogs are pretty friendly and were very calm during the whole exchange, but when he grabbed my legs, they started growling. I pulled my leg out of his hand, wished him a good evening again, and just walked away as fast as I could. I took the longer way home to make sure he didn't follow me. Once I was home, I showered and scrubbed my leg real well, since I felt gross after all that. Luckily for me, I haven't seen him again, but for a while after that, I made sure I would cover my tattoos every time I went outside, just in case. So this one time, I was playing with my toys in the basement of my parents' house. I was around 6 years old, so this happened in 2011. For context, at this time the house was not fenced, and it happened a few times that people just walked through my garden to access the field behind my house, so this could be not unusual, but wait for it. After eating dinner, my parents would let me play with my toys for a little while, since it was Halloween vacation. I can't say for sure what time it was, but it was definitely after 7 p.m. because I remembered that it was already dark outside. While I was playing, I heard a noise coming from, I thought at the time, the boiler room that was behind me. It usually makes noises, so I continued to play without even thinking about it. The door of the boiler room was closed like always. It was always closed, or else you could smell it through the whole house. Anyway, I continued serving plastic food to my non-existent clients in my non-existent restaurant. Then I heard another noise. That time I turned around to see what made the noise and where it came from, but nothing. The door to the boiler room is still closed like it's supposed to. I was confused, but didn't worry more than that and continued playing until I heard a knocking coming from the window facing me. There was a man standing there looking at me. The guy had his head between the bars of the window, and still to this day I could recognize him even if it happened 15 years ago. He was wearing this 90s Nike jacket and a faded blue cap. He had a 2-day-old beard and he looked like he was very tired. I remember him having massive dark circles under his eyes. His expression was neutral when I noticed him. After a few seconds, I ran upstairs to my parents, telling them what I just saw. My dad immediately ran down to the basement. He grabbed a hammer and got out, ready to attack the guy if needed, but the guy had disappeared into the darkness. My dad went to drive around the small village I live in to look for him, but we never saw him again. We believe he probably ran through the fields behind my house. These events honestly traumatized me. I was having a lot of nightmares, dreaming of this almost every night for a while. I had night terrors because of this, and to this day I'm still terrified when I'm in the basement. It just gives me the chills and makes me want to run upstairs as quickly as I can. So man through the window, if you read this, thanks for scaring the shit out of me. I hope you had fun watching me play. I dated this man for about 2.5 years and he nearly killed me. Very physically abusive, emotionally, sexually, all of it. The last time he hurt me was because I told him I was moving and I was gonna have a roommate. He didn't like that. He strangled me twice and punched me in the face. I escaped and called the cops. He was arrested a few days later. Until then though, he was coaching me on how I needed to go back to law enforcement and state that I hit myself and he didn't really strangle me. That I stopped taking my psychiatric medicine and that I was having a psychotic break that night. At the first hearing, I recanted and told the judge all the lies my ex told me to. The judge believed me and he was set to get released from jail, but he was still under the state county hold or something like that. Before he was supposed to get released, I went back to law enforcement after gaining some clarity and told them the truth again, in which another hearing was scheduled. Undoubtedly, my ex was notified the reason why another hearing was being scheduled. He was a gang member. Obviously, I'm not going to say which one. And as previously mentioned, by now I had moved into a new house with my roommate. But before he got arrested, he asked me where I was moving and I told him which street corner the house was on, very stupidly. Well, my roommate's boyfriend at the time was affiliated as well. We were with some real winners, huh? And he was apparently notified that my house had been marked by the gang members my ex belonged to. And that showed true. One morning around 6 a.m., my roommate and her boyfriend were sitting in the driveway in their car with the lights off. I was inside the house asleep. A car pulled up in front of the house, blocking the driveway, preventing my roommate from pulling her car out. We are still unsure whether or not these people initially knew there were people sitting in my roommate's car. The mystery car sat there blocking the driveway for a few minutes before a man got out of the passenger seat and began walking directly up the driveway to my porch. Luckily, my roommate's boyfriend had a gun on him, and since he saw the man walking towards the front door, he got out of my roommate's car and flashed his gun at the man. The man saw it and ran back to the car, which sped off. Maybe a few weeks later, I had driven to a gas station a few streets over after the sun had gone down. I was getting a vape or something. When I was walking back to my car, a man in the same car that was in front of my house pulled up next to me and started yelling something. I couldn't tell what he was saying before I just yelled back, "Shut the fuck up and leave me alone," thinking I was just being randomly catcalled. I got out of my car and went to pull out of the gas station, noticing his car sitting in front of the exit I was going to take and not moving. So I went out a different exit and turned back onto the street my house was on. I looked behind me and saw that he was following me. He waited for me to leave before he pulled out and followed behind me. I started going down different streets and he kept tailing, so eventually I freaked out and sped up real fast and made a quick impulsive turn that threw him off my tracks. I didn't go home. Another day I came home from work and saw that the window in our dining room that looks out to the backyard, the only window on the first story that doesn't have iron bars, had been tampered with from outside. It had a screen secured to it so that the window may be opened, and the screen had been ripped off. We reattached it and tried to replicate it by ripping it off ourselves, and it was hard. My roommate's boyfriend was able to, but we weren't strong enough. It would have taken a lot of effort to get that screen off. The last instance, my roommate's boyfriend and his friend had left our house to go on a walk. As they were walking back up to the house, they saw two men peeking through our other dining room window, trying to see inside. They noticed my roommate's boyfriend as he started yelling at them, asking what the fuck they were doing, and they scurried off. My ex's final hearing happened a few months ago, and I've gotten him locked up until 2036. I think maybe his fellow gangbangers have realized that a man locked up for the next 12 years is not worth risking their freedom over anymore, and I have since been left alone. So my story to tell is actually quite a chilling one. It happened a long time ago now, and comes from a brief and yet highly disturbing encounter. Despite it being brief, it would eventually leave a long-lasting impression on me, and will likely remain the most messed up thing I've ever experienced. My story began when I was a 14-year-old boy. To give some context, I was one of those, part of a group, but not one of the group types, shy and reserved. I had friends, but not much beyond school hours. So when one of my friends wanted me to hang out with her, it made a welcome change to my quiet after-school routine of video games. We walked back to hers from school, and she invited me into her home. As I walked in, I saw whom I quickly assumed was her dad. He had his back to me, preparing food. This was the first time I'd been introduced to him, and my first impression would quickly be, putting it very mildly, not great at all. As my friend introduced me, he turned around to face me holding a large kitchen knife. Suddenly, he lurched towards me as if stumbling forward, yelling, "Whoa!" He quickly turned the knife, pushing the handle quite hard into my chest. He then smirked with the eeriest expression on his face and said, "Only joking." My heart was pounding, and inwardly, I was freaking out. Well, I tried to nervously laugh it off. I am sure my face clearly said otherwise. My friend just laughed it off as Dad just fooling around, and led me into the living room. But as I sat down, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I had now. I tried to shake it off and talk to my friend, but her dad promptly entered the living room. They had music playing moderately loud on a stereo, and he cranked it to a level that sounded like a live band was playing in there with us. My friend followed him to the kitchen and soon returned. She told me she had to go to the store to get something for him, and asked if I wanted to wait for her, as it wasn't too far. Given the rather creepy encounter, my gut instinct was having none of it, and I wouldn't be ignoring it. I quickly got up and left with my friend, and we went to the store. I can't say exactly how the rest of the day went, as I can't remember, but I do know I didn't return to the house again. I wouldn't speak of what happened after that for quite some time, and just chalked it up as a really freaky interaction, locking it away in my mind. However, it wouldn't end there. He would set foot in our house a year later, dropping my friend off at a party we were having. I didn't interact with him then, though my dad did offer him a beer, and I later recalled how he just stood in the corner alone, watching everyone. I would see my friend's dad for a third time a couple years later, this time on TV. as the face of a man charged for the abduction and murder of a woman who went missing a week prior. I was stood there, right as the story broke of who he was. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Forget the sensation of my blood turning to ice in my veins. My parents later commented how they literally saw the color drain from my face in that moment. Yet in the days that followed, it only got worse. He would go on to confess while in custody to the abduction and murder of a woman who had been missing for 20 years by that point. Following corroborations of things he said previously, along with expert analysis, led the police to believe he may have actually been a prolific serial killer. He was soon probed as a potential suspect in almost a half a dozen unsolved missing person cases. However, due to lack of evidence, his involvement in these remain unclear. My mind still occasionally wanders to that first encounter. Even though his choice of victims seem to be women, I can't help but think about that music cranked up so loud. How my friend asked me if I wanted to wait for her in the house with him. If I had stayed, what would have happened to me, if anything at all? Was there any part of him that was curious, wondering about switching things up a little? Or was that knife held to my chest truly just a harmless joke of a serial killer? Several years ago, I had a very quick trip to Denver planned to visit a friend before she moved away. I was young, broke, and working a crappy entry-level job, so it was the best I could do with my one day off. I went straight from work to the airport and got into DIA around 11 p.m. I was bunking on the couch of an old college friend, and they lived about 30 to 40 minutes away from the airport. Fortunately, the light rail recently extended out to the airport, and my friend lived near the light rail line. I had taken the light rail often when living in Denver myself, but was not too familiar with the newer additions. I barely made it to the train before setting off, grateful to not have to wait around for another half hour at that time of night. It was nearing midnight when the train pulled into a brightly lit Union Station. I looked around for my connection, but it was nowhere to be found, not realizing that the connecting line was not there. Fortunately, I was able to flag down security, and they pointed me in the right direction. A few blocks away, there was another brightly lit station, separated by roughly 200 yards. Unlike the stations, there were hardly any lights, just some lights spilling in from either side where the train platform stood. I was only traveling with a backpack, so I was able to move quickly, moving out of the Union Station and towards the other platform, hoping that I was going to make my next train. As I got further away from the station, my eyes adjusted to the darkness. I noted a large figure standing in the middle of the sidewalk ahead of me. I quickly gauged my surroundings and realized there were no other paths unless I walked in the road. I decided to keep on the path and do my best to come across with a "I see you and I'm not scared" attitude. As I drew closer, I could make out a tall, muscular man, probably in his 20s or 30s. As I got closer, I made eye contact to let him know that I recognized his presence, and he was already staring right at me, mumbling to himself. As I passed by him, I could hear what he was mumbling. He was not speaking to me, but instead he was speaking about me. And as I walked past him, he began to follow me. I began to walk fast, and he began to walk faster. All the while he was saying things like, "Oh, look at that body. She's so fine. I want to feel that body," along with other sexual and crude comments about me, all being muttered to himself. The second station was still another 100 yards or so away, and there was nowhere I could go in between. I pulled out my cell phone and rang my dad, desperate for him to answer. The call went to voicemail, but I pretended he had picked up. As soon as I began talking, the man spoke to me for the first time and said, "Oh girl, I didn't mean you no harm," and the footsteps faded. I kept up the fake conversation for a moment longer before looking back, and he was nowhere to be found. Like I mentioned previously, I looked around for places I could escape and couldn't find any. I am confident with his size, if he had done anything, I wouldn't have stood a chance. I burst into the light of the station, barely made my train, and ultimately missed my stop because I was so shaken up and had to ride the train back around. I finally rested my head on the pillow in my friend's house around 2 a.m., never to travel alone at night. And whoever the disappearing man in the street was, let's never meet again. This is so bizarre. This isn't even a memory I forgot, just one I basically turned into my own fun antidote to make it less scary. 11 years later, it's fucking scary, and I know how lucky I was. For context, I was a fresh 21-year-old and had recently rediscovered the love of dance and started enjoying concerts and festivals. I had attended my first festival at 20 and had the most amazing time volunteering and meeting people. It was a last minute and unexpected situation that first year, but after the amazing experience I had, I was hooked. It's prudent to add that I was extremely naive and obviously new to this kind of scene. So the next year, I cut off the friends I had gone to the festivals with before, but still had friends of other friends that went that I got along with very well and had good memories with. So even though I was going to my second year at the same festival, I was going solo and just camping with friends of friends, which I suppose was the beginning of the problem. I got going kinda late, so when I got to the festival, the lines to get in were extremely long. I packed diligently, but the phone service wasn't great and I had a hard time contacting the semi-friends that I was camping with. By the time I had found them and had set up, it was dark. It was newer, but a pretty large festival, and I really have a bad sense of direction. In the future years, I learned to bring a battery or solar lights and obnoxious decorations because of the night. It was also in a different location that year, so unfamiliar with where I camped with my surroundings. My ex-roommate Tom and his girlfriend Gina were the ones I was closest to, and Tom was bringing some special acid for me as kind of an apology for not sticking up for me in a roommate situation. We all went to the first show together, but all got really high so fast. I took too much and knew it pretty quickly, so I knew the night was going to go sideways. But by the time I realized, Tom and Gina had wandered off, leaving me completely alone. I tried to find my way to my tent, thinking I'd lay down for a bit and be okay, but I couldn't remember how to get there or where it was. It was dark, and I was starting to panic, being that I was high as shit and didn't know where anyone I knew was, didn't know how to find my campsite or anything. I was in a crop top and jean shorts in the high desert at nighttime, so it started to get cold. I wandered over to the disco area because it was the first thing I found, had a legit disco ball and all. I wandered around and see this woman in the most unusual clothing, think almost pioneer, so I went to talk to her. I generally to this day don't know if this person was real. That's how messed up I was. We ended up wandering around. Again, not sure if this was a real person or a hallucination, trying to find my campsite when we reached the RV camp area. This man, maybe in his early 30s, with glow sticks, asked me if I want any, and we say, yeah. She goes first, and as soon as it's on her wrist, she skips away. I call out to her to wait, but she doesn't stop. The man looks at me and says, "Are you okay? Do you think you can find your friend?" I stupidly say, "Oh, I don't know her really. I can't find my campsite, and she was helping me, but oh well." He responds with, "You remind me a lot of my little sister. I wouldn't want you running around lost like this." Look, my buddy and I are gonna watch some shows, and I wouldn't feel right leaving you, so you can stay in his RV for a few hours. Obviously, I was too high, too young, too naive to see where this all would go, and I stupidly complied and followed him. It was fine at first. It was a toy hauler, so the back end was like a U-Haul that stayed open. The first guy put on an album I previously loved as a teenager, but now can barely listen to, tucked me in and left. I didn't see his buddy at this point. Fast forward God knows how many hours. I've been tripping out to this music when they got back. First thing was, the guy that had told me that I looked like his little sister climbed on top of me while I was half conscious, kissed my neck, and began touching me. Then I felt the second one, in his hands. I was still so high and out of it, but immediately told them to stop, that I wasn't in the place for that. They got angry, and the one who had gotten me there was the most frightening. I saw his eyes change in that moment, and I knew I was fucked if I couldn't get away. It didn't matter how high I was, I needed to get away from them. I don't even recall formulating a plan. I remember the main man saying, "We helped you, now you owe us," and slamming my knee into his groin. I may have forgotten that he was on top of me at this point. All I remember is running for my life into the prickly bushes, not knowing where I was, but desperately running away. The second man seemed a bit nervous about the whole thing and didn't do much except touch me, while the other held me down with the weight of his body. I met a couple of kind souls that calmed me down when I completely freaked out, crying, covered in dirt and thorns, and they gave me a safer space. I didn't sleep that night as I could no longer trust kind strangers, but I also couldn't find my camp. It was 10 yards away, as I discovered the next day. To the men who tricked me, trapped me, and would have done something inevitably bad to me, let's not meet again, and also fuck you both. Edit, I forgot to add this, cause it's a pretty intense memory for me, but I'm pretty sure the only reason I got away was because they were on something too. I hadn't even met Guy 2 before, so I don't know about him. But the one I did seemed crazed and very amped up and high and out of it. And yes, I know the whole thing was stupid of me. It was not even a month into 21 though, with very little life experience. My youngest son is autistic and 5 years old. It's very obvious that he's autistic. He constantly stims with his hands, rocks back and forth, and doesn't respond to communication. He's a Gestalt language processor, so he repeats catchphrases that only I can understand. For instance, he will say, "Widow wobbles," when he has a hole in his sock. Saturday, I took him and my daughter, who's 8, to the park. A man, probably in his mid to late 30s, was there, with who he said was his niece. Her and my daughter headed off, so he came over to talk to me. My son was in his own little world, but playing on the equipment from time to time, and he hits himself on the head, so I constantly redirect him. This man asked if my son was autistic, and I say yes. He then asked me, when was he diagnosed? I told him at the age of 2, almost 3. He asked me if he was in regular classes or special needs. I didn't answer him right away because I'm getting uncomfortable. He can tell and responds with, "I think my nephew is autistic and he's 3. So I let my guard down a little, which was the wrong decision. I tell him he's in a special needs class. He asked me what school because he wants to know options for his nephew. I hesitate and tell him the 4 schools in the district that offer special needs classes, not specifying which school my son goes to. Then he asked if my son runs off a lot. I just reply sometimes. He notices a GPS tracker on my son's ankle. He asks how well that tracks him and if he ever tries to take it off. At this point, I realize this is not a conversation I want to have. I tell him I'm not comfortable talking to him about this anymore. He responds with, "I'm concerned about my nephew." I tell him that not all autistic children are the same and that he should get him evaluated. I call my daughter over, who's upset because she's having fun with a little girl, and pick up my son and we go to the car. I'm watching him as we leave and he's just staring at us. My daughter asks me why we had to go, and I tell her we have to go home to do stuff around the house. She's very intuitive and asks, "Is it because of that girl's stepdad?" I ask her why she thinks it's her stepdad, and she says that the little girl told her that he was her mom's boyfriend. I ask what else she said about him. She tells me the little girl said, "Tom likes to talk to girls like your mom, and it makes my mom mad." I then asked if there was anything else, and she tells me that the girl said that she was glad she met my daughter because she's the only child and doesn't get to play with other kids except at school. She also tells me that the little girl asked for her phone number and wanted to see her again soon. The man was lying to me. For what reason, I don't know. I can only assume to make it seem like he was single. Could be more sinister than that. I have no idea. I immediately call the police and tell them everything. They get my info and said they're sending an officer to the park. By the time the officer got to the park, a couple hours later though, they were, of course, gone. I give the dispatcher a description, the man and little girl's first names, and what I think he was driving since it was just us there, so I assume it was his vehicle in the lot. They tell me that they'll call me if they need any more information. Lesson learned. I'm almost certain he took advantage of my willingness to help another autistic person to try to get information about my son or about me. Update: the man has been found and arrested. My brother shared my story with his friend, who's a sheriff deputy in the county to the south of me. They had got similar reports about a man matching the same description. One report included him allegedly trying to lure a disabled toddler away from his mother at a trampoline park. They had video and his license plate at this time. My brother's friend sent me this guy's mugshot and asked me if it was the man. It was. He was investigating the trampoline park incident, but since it was in a different county, didn't know of my report until my brother shared it with him. I asked about the girl that was with him, and he couldn't tell me anything other than she's safe. They arrested him in a county almost 2 hours away from me yesterday. I found out his name and looked up all his charges. He had warrants in states north of me for so many things, including stalking, violating a protective order, and child endangerment, and new charges due to the trampoline park incident. Since nothing technically illegal happened in my situation, he won't have any charges brought up against him, but my story may be needed for the case. I'm not a lawyer or law enforcement, so I don't know specifics on how or why, but maybe to show a trend in his behavior targeting disabled children. When I find out more, I'll update here. Parents, trust your instincts. I know some comments think I went too far calling the police in this case. I'm confident now that I did not. Who knows how many times he may have done this, but it went unreported. This was some years ago when I was living in a different city. I hadn't really been on my own all that long, and my housing situation fell apart at the last minute, so I had to scramble to figure it out. Meaning, you guessed it, random roommates. Now, the year before, I had a random roommate that was an amazing person and ended up becoming a great friend. So I figured this would be the same. It was not, but actually, that's not the focus of the story. Enter roommates. Ben, who I did actually know a bit from the previous year and was becoming friends with, Tom, and Mike. Now this was the very first couple of days after moving in, and we all hung out to get to know each other a little better, but Tom and Mike hadn't fully moved in yet. It was a big old house, separated by floor, and the top level locked at the stairs. This is important to note. Ben and I lived upstairs and Tom and Mike downstairs. I've always been paranoid and definitely have a good reason. So when I'm home, all the doors are locked. And when I leave, all the doors are locked. I sleep with my bedroom locked. I was home alone. Ben was at work, and Tom and Mike sort of in and out moving stuff in. I'll note here that both had a lot of expensive stuff, like in the 5-figure range. Well, I was watching something on my laptop in my room, bedroom locked, and both entrances to my part of the house locked. I start hearing a lot of noises coming from downstairs, sounding like the doors of the cupboards opening, furniture moving, etc., and figured it was just Tom or Mike, until I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I was technically supposed to be somewhere at the time, which they knew, but it canceled last minute. So no one would have known I was home, and they would have no reason to come upstairs when they both knew I was supposed to be gone. That's when I got panicky. Hearing them come closer and closer to the top of the stairs, I never sat so still. Then the knob started to jiggle. I could hear it clearly as my room was closest to the entryway. At this point, I'm on the phone with 911 whispering that someone was in my house, without giving away that I was there to whoever it was. The house was super close to downtown and the cops arrived there in minutes, but they were the longest of my life at that moment. The downstairs was completely ransacked, like something out of a movie. It was so surreal to see. They had taken over $20,000 in electronics, broken furniture, plates and stuff, even ripped through the mattress. Turned out Tom and Mike had left the door unlocked while moving. This would not be the last time before I fled the house. The intruder was gone before the cops showed, so I spent the next several months afraid that they would come back, though it would turn out to be the least of my future worries. So glad that I always locked doors. Considering the way the downstairs looked, I don't know what they would have done to me. To whoever was on the other side of that thankfully locked door, let's not meet. In college, 2008 through 2014, I was an avid metal detectorist. I knew of an old military trail and river crossing way back in the secluded portion of the woods that I knew not many others were aware of. I finally decided one winter morning that I was going to go and metal detect. The trail was a mile or two away from a city park along the South Concho River in San Angelo, Texas. I parked my truck, got all my gear, which included a serrated knife for digging, and began my trek through the raw woods and brush for the trail. About halfway into the trees, I get to a clearing and find a tent and a campsite about 40 yards back from the river and very isolated. There's cans laying all around it, some clothes, and other stuff that made it evident that someone was using it. I didn't hang around there for long and kept on my way. As I was getting past the tent, this haggard-looking guy comes out from the brush just a few feet away from me. I startled him as much as he startled me, and after some innocent chit-chat back and forth, he asked me what I was doing in the woods. I told him about the old trail, my metal detecting stuff, and lied that it was a pretty well-known site for hobbyists like me. The latter seemed to get him a bit anxious. He starts asking me if I messed with this campsite any, and I told him no, except for accidentally stepping on one of the cans. He was mostly concerned if I had looked inside his tent itself though, which truthfully, I hadn't. The guy relayed that his wife had kicked him out of their apartment a few days ago, and that he was just staying in the woods until he got back on his feet. It really didn't add up in my mind, but I didn't ask anything else about it. Finally, I told him I was going to get on my way, and with a weird look on his face, he suggested that I not go behind his campsite because he had recently used the bathroom back there. Whether there was fresh fertilizer or not, no way I was going to be hanging around much longer regardless. I went a little further towards the trail I wanted to metal detect on, but never felt quite comfortable. So I made a quick turn towards the river and headed back to my truck fairly rapidly. Never saw the guy again until about 2 years later. His picture was in the local news for being apprehended by authorities for the murder of his wife. He killed her and had buried her in the exact area of the woods where I encountered him on that day. Apparently, even though I couldn't recall if it was that day of the crime or not, he had just completed the matter when we had met. I recently went on a date with a guy from my school who I met on a dating app. He seemed super sweet and charming over text, so I agreed to go on a date with him, especially after two friends told me they knew him from class where he was a generally funny guy. We go to a small, pretty prestigious university, which also made me sure that he would be normal. He was supposed to meet me at 6 to go on a picnic, but ended up picking me up at 8:30. He drove me to his apartment, and although uncomfortable, I agreed to go in because of everything I already knew about him. The apartment was only lit with one candle and a small glowing light on the floor, which didn't add much. It was a multiple bedroom apartment that he lived in alone, which made it even more odd. We talked and ate some food, and he seemed nervous and uneasy for most of it. He suddenly switched the conversation to our deepest, darkest secrets and asked if I ever seriously thought about killing anyone. After I said no, he made up a story about being in the Navy and having to bomb a ship and killing 5 people. When I was unsure how to respond, he sort of just passed it off as a joke and said that he had a serious thought of killing someone else, his ex, current boyfriend. I was extremely uncomfortable at this point and wanted to leave, and he agreed to drive me home. Before we left, he said he wanted to show something to me and pulled out a rifle that he pointed in my direction. When I got startled, he remained eerily calm and said that he got it for hunting, but couldn't think of ever killing an animal. We left, and I got back to my friend's place safely. Everyone I've told has been flabbergasted about how the date went, and I can't shake the feeling that something is off about him, and it's creeping me out. Any thoughts on this would be appreciated. It was my day off, and my husband was traveling for work. I just came upstairs after running on the treadmill, which we keep on the ground floor where the garage is. I came upstairs and was about to hop into the shower, but on my way up I saw these 2 plastic skeletons I bought for Halloween. The plan was to hang them up on the awning so it looked like they were sitting on our front balcony. It was a bit dirty out there, so I decided to put them up before I got into the shower. So I was outside in a sports bra and leggings only. I had to bring the chair from the dining room outside so that I could reach the top of the awning. There were hooks for hanging up plants there, so I was using said hooks to hang the skeletons. The door to my house was ajar while I was doing this. I was done hanging them up and adjusting their poses when a woman came running up the stairs to our front door. To be honest, I was startled that there was a random woman on my porch that when she said, "I'm dying of thirst, I'm so thirsty, can I have some water?" I went inside and grabbed a water bottle. We had recently had a box of bottled waters delivered, so they were just right inside. The woman followed me inside and I started panicking as I realized I was now inside the house with a strange woman. There's a lot of homeless people and junkies in the neighborhood, but she was well dressed. Besides that, she was wearing a wool peacoat in 80-degree weather, which is odd. I'm a small person and she was probably a head taller than me and outweighed me by at least 30 pounds. She checked the water bottle and started chatting with me as if we were old friends. She asked me how long I had this house and where my parents were. I'm over 30, so that was a weird question. I told her my parents never lived here, and then said, "I have to leave soon, so you better get going," and literally shoved her out the door. I texted my husband who was overseas, and he could see the ring camera that she left the property. He kept asking why I let her in. Honestly, I'm not sure why, but I also didn't expect her to follow me inside. So, strange woman from the sidewalk who just came into my house. Let's not meet. 9 years ago, I had met a person that to this day, I still wish I never did. I was an isolated, bullied, and depressed 8th grader with the added state of being a plus-size kid in a sports-centric town. So basically, I was beaten and ridiculed on a daily basis. I couldn't make any friends with my new classmates. All my old friends from elementary school got placed in different classes, and nobody was in the same after-school groups as me anymore. We also were in a scout group, but that got disbanded before I went to middle school. I was also lonely that if someone talked to me without picking on me, it made me happy. I had a Google Plus account, the only social media I could access at school that I kept hidden from my parents. I would use it to check my favorite fandoms and hopefully use it to make some new friends. One day, I was on Google Plus in the computer lab. I had commented under a piece of fan art of a character I liked. The person who made the post had replied to me not even a minute later. I remember getting very excited seeing that notification, my heart swelling up in excitement. The two of us spent the next 10 minutes of my class talking to each other in the comment section. We ended up replying so much, we flooded a good portion of the comments with our talk. After I had to change classes, I logged back in on one of the Chromebooks we had stored in the back of the class and saw that she actually messaged me. Her name was Haley. At least, she told me that was her name. But years later, I'm not so sure it was her actual name. In the message I got, Haley told me that she was 2 years older than me and that we had a lot of things in common. I spent the rest of the school day on my phone, not giving a damn to do anything in my classes. We talked for the next week in her DMs until she suggested that we message each other in a private chat room. Later that day, we made a private chat on an online messaging site. We first talked on messages, then Haley asked if we could do a voice call. I told her I wasn't sure, but she told me it was only to better hold a conversation with me, and eventually, after she asked me multiple times, I gave in. After an hour of us talking, she suggested a video chat. I agreed, both to make sure she was actually my age, but also to put a name to the face. Haley turned on the camera and she did look the same age range as me. I don't know why, but that fact haunts me more than anything else. The fact that she looked close to my age, plus that she easily smiled and spoke so friendly to me, made me feel like I had nothing to be afraid of. So that led me quickly to believing I could trust her. We ended up talking for hours after, with me practically on cloud 9 the entire time. In the beginning of our little friendship, things were going alright. We told each other about our schools, what we liked, and were gushing over our favorite series. We talked almost every day, and stayed up late talking nearly all night. We even exchanged a couple silly pictures of ourselves and memes back and forth a lot. After we had been talking for 6 months, Haley asked me if I would want to meet her friends. At first, I was ecstatic, and the thought of having more friends made me so excited I didn't think twice before saying yes. Haley invited me in, and I got to meet her other friends. I had a completely different feeling about these people compared to what I felt for Haley. Something made me feel unsafe in that chat room, even though they all seemed nice and Haley reassured me I could trust them. It felt like my instincts were trying to warn me, but I wasn't sure what about, so I ignored it. Most of them were, much older than me. In the chat with her main friends, there were 6 other people. Most of them were 18 or 19, but there was these 2 guys I distinctly remember being in their 20s. I asked how they all met, and they told me that they met each other on another social media site or from real life, but wouldn't answer any more of my questions. I was a bit naive, so all of the red flags that were popping up went completely over my head. From constant loud talking to frequent overlapping each other, the calls I were on with them were pure chaos. The messages were even worse because they would frequently drop cuss words and topics that should not be brought up with someone who's still a minor. I tried building a genuine connection with them, but they all acted dismissive to me and acted like I was annoying whenever I tried to talk in the conversation. Needless to say, I didn't like them that much. Haley, on the other hand, was all about them. She would pull the same exact habits, jokes, dirty words and all of that with the others. They could say something super problematic, but she would be laughing right along with them. I was shocked by this version of Haley, because she never acted like this to me when we were just talking the two of us. We still talked a bunch, but slowly, she was talking to her other friends more than she was talking to me. At first I thought I was fine, but the more she ignored my messages or didn't pick up my calls, the more I got bothered. When I called to confront Haley about blowing me off, she went ballistic on me, saying that I was being selfish and that I didn't want her to talk to her other friends because I was jealous. I explained that wasn't true, but she wouldn't listen and then hung up on me. Haley then ghosted me for almost a month, leaving me worried and upset over what happened. When she started talking to me again, I was so emotionally distraught. I was crying on our first call and apologizing for what I said the last time we talked. She told me it was fine, she just needed some time alone, and that she would talk to me a bit more. And indeed she did, although not what I thought she would. Haley began to tell me she had depression, and that's the reason why she wouldn't talk to me for a month. I didn't judge her about it, and said whatever she needed to talk about, she could come to me. This led to her trauma dumping on me nearly every day, talking about how shitty her home life was, how bad her relationship with her mom, and how much she hated herself. I was there to offer her an ear and some kind words whenever Haley called or messaged me about it. This quickly became part of our routine. Almost daily, in the middle of us having any kind of conversation, she would begin complaining about anything that happened during the day. If not that, it would go on about how ugly she thought she was, or how much her life sucked, and wanted things to end. That last one freaked me out the most. I was worried about her because we lived in different states. I couldn't help her in person. Every time she would become self-deprecating, I would say otherwise, giving her compliments and words of affirmation for so long that my throat ached and felt raw. And then, just as fast as she would bring it up, she dropped that conversation and we would talk like before. Haley also began calling me for long periods of time and messaging me late into the night. Phone calls would stretch on for hours at a time, and her texts would come in until 3 or 4 in the morning. The thing was, it was mainly her talking now. Every phone call, she'd take over the conversation. If I didn't message her back quickly enough, she'd spam multiple texts back to back faster than I could read them. I would try to end them myself, but every time I would try, Haley would chastise me for wanting to leave our conversation, when not too long ago I wanted to have her attention. She basically guilt-tripped me back into talking to her, and it worked. Even if I had lost interest in our talks or didn't want her to message me during class, I would still let her talk and reply. At least I still had her attention, and she still wanted to talk to me. This all went on in a cycle of over 2 years, and it left me feeling more anxious and exhausted than anything else ever did. I felt like we had nothing in common anymore, and she either ghosts me for a week or spends the entire weekend texting me nonstop. The topics of her self-worth having also gotten worse. They escalated to her messaging me, "Goodbye," or "I can't live like this anymore," without responding to any of my following messages or calls. Alongside of that, she would send me a picture of her marking herself, telling me about how it felt to do it. The sight of those messages would send me into a panic attack, and every time I would panic and message her after, I would be sent into tears. Not only that, the group chat with her friends got worse. Arguments broke out frequently. Drama and gossip spread like an oil spill, and it led to people being blocked, unblocked almost every few days. I hated talking to them. They began ganging up on me in the messages, and Haley was often the first one to make rude jokes about me that they would all laugh at. I began getting sick of it and would stop messaging and calling both Haley and her friends, despite her begging me to. One night, while the group was in an argument over text, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of all the drama and them treating me like shit all the time. So I messaged the group chat telling them that I had enough of them and privately messaged Haley that I needed a break. Then I left both chat rooms, blocked everyone I talked to, deleted my message account, and deleted the site from my computer history. Once it was all over, I felt like I was freed from some kind of prison, and all I could do was cry in relief and euphoria over the whole thing being over. I later found out that all the pictures Haley had sent to me were stock images and photoshopped. I also found out from a little bit of digging through her background, a lot of things didn't add up. I learned that she was actually a lot older than what she originally told me, at least 6 years older than me, meaning that the first time when we met, she was about to be 20 years old. Many things from our interactions still haunt me, especially the picture of her marks and her self-hating messages. For almost 3 months, I would have nightmares about Haley getting back in contact with me and what she would say and do to me. I have many better friends now, and I'm absolutely certain I will never hear from Haley again. But sometimes, I still wonder who that woman really was, and what it was about me that she was interested in. Hopefully I'll never find out. So Haley, if you somehow ever find this story, let's not meet again. This was a fairly short and simple encounter, but it still bothers me when I think about it. I'm a female and was 18 at the time. I was walking home alone from a night out with friends. For some reason, I thought I was invincible. It was something I will never do now, even if I had been drinking. I was walking back on the main road by the sea, but because it was very early in the morning, there was absolutely no one around and it was very dark. A man in a yellow car slowed down beside me and said something like, "Get in, I'm a taxi, get in." Taxis are black where I live and are required to have certain stickers to identify them as a legit taxi. I was drunk, but not stupid enough to buy it. I knew that he was not a taxi driver, so I kicked up a fuss and shouted at him, various fuck offs, "You're not a fucking taxi," etc., and he drove off quickly. What bothers me is, if he did try to physically overpower me, he probably would have. Last night, I woke to an unsettling noise of loud banging and my dogs frantically barking. Living alone with my girlfriend, we had grown accustomed to our neighbors' domestic disputes, and I have to call the police often. I stumbled to the bathroom, as the walls there are thin and separate our duplex from theirs. As I approached the bathroom door, the entire house was dark, and a tall shadow was in the bathtub. I wasn't wearing my glasses. I'm incredibly nearsighted, so I struggled to discern whether the shadow was merely the shower curtain or what it was. Then the shadow spoke. I don't know what he said, but the gut-wrenching panic is still fresh. I screamed and fled back to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My girlfriend, now awake and terrified, joined me as I dialed the police. They instructed me to lock the door, but my bedroom doesn't have one. With the banging growing louder and more aggressive, I braced myself against the door, praying that help would arrive in time. To my relief, the police arrived swiftly, in only 5 minutes. When I finally emerged from the bedroom, I found that they had dragged him, naked, from the bathtub because he had been trying to take a shower. They were questioning him on my couch while he was handcuffed. He was incredibly drunk and had wandered into the wrong house. The one night I forget to lock the doors. But to the drunk, naked stranger who saw me squinting at him, pantless, in the dark, let's not meet. My girlfriend and I arrive at a remote stretch of forest around dusk. We see 2 strange-looking men sitting on some rocks, but didn't think much of it. We drove about 2 or 3 miles further into the forest and set up camp. 30 to 45 minutes later, it was dark at this point. One of the 2 guys walked up to our camp and yelled, "Hello?" I responded and he asked if he could walk through our camp. I asked him why. and he said that he needed to get to the other side of the creek. He walked around our car, and once he saw my girlfriend, he stopped and asked her if we smoked. She said no. He crossed the creek and walked into some bushes and turned off his light. I stood at the bank of the creek watching him, and he just stared back at us for about 5 minutes. He eventually walked away. We threw everything in the car and left. Also, there was nothing on the side of the creek he crossed. No campsites, no trails, nothing. Weird behavior. I didn't think much of it until he turned off his light and stood in the bushes. Also, where was the second guy? There were no other campers at this stretch of the forest, and we didn't see any vehicles. We were the very last campsite on the road. There's nothing past us. I'm a female 23. I'm staying with my friend, also female 23, for a couple weeks in the town I grew up in. She works at a restaurant. Without giving away too much details about the location, it's a plaza with a river nearby, a movie theater, restaurants, and boutiques. We entered through the parking garage on the bottom floor, which has 3 stories, both elevators and stairs. This is important. Her shift was about 6 hours, so I decided to do some shopping, listen to music, and walk around before eating at the restaurant my friend works at. I was sitting at a bar on the corner alone, listening to music. A bigger man approached me. He had a security guard beanie on that was incredibly dirty and tattered up. He was muttering, and his eyes were barely open. What I got from the muttering was, "Are you? I like your... Is anyone sitting?" But keep in mind, it was incredibly muttered. I'm just guessing what he was trying to say. All of this was said while he was switching back and forth between looking in my eyes and staring at my chest. I told him multiple times I couldn't understand what he said. After a bit of back and forth, I put the headphone back around my neck and he left me alone. I told my friend about what just happened immediately. I tried to shake it off, hoping it was an isolated incident. If this was where the story ended, I wouldn't be writing this, unfortunately. About an hour or so later, I see someone approach the bar to my left out of the corner of my eye, and I felt their eyes on me. I didn't look, but somehow I knew it was him. My heart started beating really fast. I texted my friend and told her I felt really sketched out. I wanted to believe that I was misreading things and just letting my anxiety get the best of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling. 30 or so minutes later, she gets off. As we walked towards the parking garage stairs to get to our car, I saw him sitting on a bench waiting for me. The benches aren't super close to the elevator. They're closer to the restaurant, if anything. The second I spotted him, my blood ran cold. He saw us walking towards the stairs to the parking garage and started running towards us. I was face to face with him by the time we got to the top of the stairs. We booked it back to the restaurant and used the employee elevator to get to the car. An employee escorted us to the car as well. The employee told us there was a lot of cases of homeless people who walked around the restaurants, so I presumed he was homeless and just walking in and out of restaurants until he saw me. I'm incredibly thankful I trusted my gut and that I saw him. I don't know what would have happened to us if I hadn't seen him at first, but I don't want to find out. I was 15 years old. My family had just moved to a city. My parents found a house to live in, which was very nice. My parents slept on the first floor where the kitchen and living room were also located. My brother and I slept on the ground floor in the rooms next door. An important detail, our rooms opened to the game room with 3 small windows. One evening in the first week after we moved, I was so tired that I fell asleep very early while scrolling through TikTok. I woke up a few hours later, around 2 a.m., with the feeling of being observed by something. I stood in complete darkness for a dozen minutes. then grabbed the remote control and closed the shutters on my windows. After this, I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't because the feeling of being watched didn't leave me, so I kept busy as best I could. I played the electric guitar as it was almost inaudible when not plugged in. I did some drawings and I read. 4 a.m. arrives. I haven't slept for 2 hours and I still don't fall asleep, so I decide to stay on my phone until I fall asleep. I put on my headphones and turn on the music. Suddenly, I hear tapping on the window in the game room, which is just behind my bedroom door. I turn off my music right away, take off my headphones, and stay quiet. The tapping becomes more aggressive. Then the person says, "Hey, hey," and no more noise. Panicked, I call my mother, hoping that she will wake up and answer the phone. She answers me. I tell her everything. We exit the house to look around, but no one was there. Some small plants under the window were damaged and were laying on the ground, so there really was someone. Today, we still don't know who it was, nor what he or she wanted. So this happened in June, and I thought I would share it here. I'm a 16-year-old female. I live in the US, but my parents are both from France, and every 2 years we travel there to see family. This year, prices were higher than usual, so after some searching, we found that it would be cheaper if I went on an earlier flight, had a layover in Chicago, and meet up with my parents in New York for our flight to Lyon. The reason why I would go alone and not the entire family is because my parents didn't want to have to deal with the 6-hour layover with my 6-year-old brother and 9-month-old sister. My parents made sure it was okay with me traveling alone, and I was actually excited because it would be the first time flying alone, so I was kind of looking forward to it. So eventually the trip came, and my flight to Chicago went pretty well. And for 2 hours after I landed, it was fun walking around and exploring the airport without my family. Eventually, I found a quiet corner without too many people around. After some time, I noticed a guy with a beard looking at me, and he wasn't really doing anything else but looking at me and then looking at his phone. I was a little weirded out, but just thought he was lost in thought, and I just so happened to be in the same direction that he was looking in. So I decided to move. I was in the same area, but just in a different spot. After 5 minutes, I looked around and he was just watching me. So I decided to move into a different area. For 30 minutes or so, there was no sign of him, but after a few minutes, I looked up and I saw him sitting 50 feet away. But this time, he was with another guy who had dark curly hair. They were both looking at me and talking to each other. The curly-haired dude even pointed at me, and the bearded one nodded to him. I made eye contact with the bearded one, and he gave me this weird smile. At this point, I was freaked out, so I grabbed my stuff and decided to move to a completely different gate area. While walking down the long hallway, I turned around and saw the two walking maybe 75 feet behind me. They noticed me noticing them, and they picked up their pace. That was when I really started to feel scared, and I started looking around for a security guard or something. I saw a couple with a toddler looking at the arrival and departure screen, and I got an idea. I ran up to them and said, "Hi, these two guys are following me. Can you pretend to be my mom and dad?" The mom said, "Yes, of course, come here." She pulled me into a hug, which made me realize how much I was shaking. The two dudes passed us, with the curly-haired one looking at me. After they passed, the dad asked me if I was okay. I said yes and explained that the guys had been following me for almost an hour, maybe longer. The mom then asked, "What time is your flight, hon?" "It's at 8. Well, ours just got delayed until 9:30. Do you want to sit with us for a while? You can wait just in case they come back." "Please, if you could," I replied. So that's what we did. We went to the gate and sat and talked. I told them why I was alone and where I was going. They explained that they're going to see the mom's parents in Texas. I got to play with their lovely daughter, and it was just a good time. The two guys came back around 45 minutes after we sat at the gate. They sat a few rows behind us and watched us for like 10 minutes before leaving for good. Once it was time for me to go, I thanked them profusely and gave them $50 as a thank you. I said goodbye to them and went off to New York. I'm so glad I found them, and I'll always be thankful. Looking back, I don't really know what the two guys could have done since I was in the airport, but regardless, to the two creepy dudes, let's not meet. Trigger warning for this story. This was many years ago, maybe when I was 20 or 21. I was assaulted and went out jogging in a park while on vacation, someplace north in Ontario. It was deep in the woods. I was listening to music, alone. I should have been more careful. There was this guy with a blue dirt bike at the entrance of the trail who was acting really creepy and suspicious. He kept trying to start a conversation with me as I was unpacking my stuff and getting ready. Kept asking me things like, "Where did you come from?" or "You work out?" When I was changing my shoes, he asked me for my shoe size, and I immediately thought that he was a creep. I just slightly chatted with him and kept my gaze down. I was wearing a hat, so I was hoping that it would hide my face. Nearly half an hour of jogging and sightseeing, I saw the blue bike ahead. It was parked off to the side, and I remember the feeling like a lump in my stomach suddenly formed, and I thought for sure that this guy was probably going to try something. I was on the main path for the whole way, but considering he was waiting there, I decided to backtrack a little and take the nearest side path to avoid the encounter. 5 minutes into the side path, there was a narrow spot in the tree that led to an old concrete square. I think it was a water reservoir or foundation or something. I wasn't thinking and just kept going. Trigger warning here. I stepped in this black adhesive stuff on the other side of the lip of the concrete. My shoes were completely stuck. It was like some sort of tar or glue. I have no idea. I didn't know what it was and just assumed it was something from the structure, like leftover construction stuff or something. I spent a couple of minutes just trying to work my shoes out, but eventually had to take them off for better leverage. Then I saw the man coming towards me. I just felt panicked. I was going to get the bear spray when he said he was just here to help. I didn't want to potentially aggravate him or do something that could get me in trouble, so I just stood back and let him try to get my shoe out. I noticed that he was just pretending that he couldn't get them out, and I remembered what he said about my shoe size and thought something was off, so I backed away and considered spraying him. It happened fast. He turned around and slapped my foot with the black stuff. I stumbled trying to get back. I missed the spray, and he was wrestling it out of my hand. I tried to knee him in the groin. He released me, and I ran off. I got my sock off and was able to run, but he just had more of the stuff. He had a metal bucket of this black stuff, and he was slapping handfuls of it at my feet. I couldn't kick him, and it was difficult to move. I was screaming and hitting him the best I could. He pushed me to the ground, took my backpack, and just continued sticking the stuff to me. My body was frozen in fear. I heard a buzzing sound, and I knew what it was without seeing it. I began struggling to get up and kick him, do something. My clothes were pinned, and my arms too. I'm not going to go into detail, but he used a vibrator on me. I was crying, stretching as far as I could. If I almost got an arm out, he would add more. I rarely ever masturbated at the time, so suffice to say, it was overstimulation. He didn't undress me apart from my pack and socks, and didn't use his penis anywhere, so I'm at least grateful of that. He just kept buzzing and fondling my body, asking me things like, "Do you like it? Does it feel good?" It was probably around an hour of that, and he recorded it. I just let him do whatever until I could find a way out or someone would come by. He brought this towel up to my nose. It was fuming in some sort of chemical. I was thrashing and trying to scream. Somebody heard, I guess, and shouted. I don't remember much. Time was all fuzzy. I felt like I was falling on a roller coaster. When I got my thoughts back together, it was getting dark and I was alone. I spent a long time getting up without ripping my clothes off after being stuck and scraping off my body where it was stuck to my skin. I don't know what the stuff was, but Googling it suggested bird lime or construction adhesive. It was apparently a type of fetish, so yeah. I walked back to my car. There was nobody there at night, and I just drove back to my cabin and sat there in the bath, not even turning the water on, just sitting there thinking of what happened, trying to get as much of that stuff off of me before I washed myself. My feet and parts around my belly were stained black for a couple weeks. That night I laid there silent. Even now, just touching stuff like soap brings back that time, and I can't help but feel weird by the slamming feeling of it. I'm wondering if anyone else has had a similar experience or an encounter with black adhesive. This happened a few years ago in Upper Ontario on a semi-official hiking trail. I really don't remember much of what happened during or after the assault, possibly because of whatever fumes I was exposed to. I remember driving very slowly because I was still feeling off balance. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have been driving, but there was no traffic that late. One evening, I was out in Lacey, Washington, to pick up a handgun I had recently purchased for protection. Contrary to the pickup status, both online and sent to my email, the store didn't have it in stock yet and told me to come back in another week. I live about an hour away from Lacey, and at the time when I had gotten there, evening rush hour was beginning to become unbearable. I didn't want to drive all the way back home just yet, as it was an additional hour to my already long commute. Side note, the car that I was driving belonged to my dad, and I was borrowing it until I had enough money saved up for a new car, after my beloved Honda broke down the previous year. I killed some time by bumming around the store I had purchased the firearm from, then decided to drive over to the nearest coffee shop. It was a newly built cabin-style cafe with a modern twist. The barista handed me my 16-ounce dirty chai, and I walked back out to my car. I then drove to a gas station around the corner, still trying to kill time until traffic thinned out. The car didn't need gas, so I pulled into the parking spot right at the corner of a four-way street block the gas station was on. I turned off the engine, stepped outside, and lit up a smoke, leaning against the driver's side door so as not to stink up the interior. The weather was overcast and drizzly, but not overly cold. It was now dusk, and most of the daylight had disappeared. The stoplights at the intersection were diffused by the late autumn mist. I watched them flicker from green to yellow to red as the traffic was orchestrated accordingly. Zoned out by the lights and generally being lost in thought while enjoying my coffee and smoke, I didn't notice the man walking towards me until he was already halfway across the street. He was white, average height, and strawberry blonde, maybe in his mid-20s. He definitely hadn't changed his clothes in a good while, and carried a backpack I assumed to be full of the few belongings he had. He didn't smell, but looked raggedy and unkempt. My immediate thought was that drugs were likely a part of his lifestyle. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I'm always cautious having grown up in the suburbs of Seattle. The man finished crossing the street, awkwardly limping towards my car, maintaining eye contact and a winced grin. I locked my car out of caution, but remained outside smoking casually. Normally, I'm not a social person, but I don't go out of my way to be unpleasant either. He approached me and stood about 10 feet away from me when he said, "Hello," and asked if I had a light. I complied hesitantly, but saw no harm meeting his simple request. Taking 2 steps forward, I lit the cigarette which he was holding out towards me while he was approaching, He attempted to make small talk, weaving in hints that he had just gotten off the bus and still needed to get down the road another block. Somewhere in his poorly crafted sob story, he stopped himself mid-sentence, like a bad actor, and pretended to be struck by an epiphany. "Hey, would you mind dropping me off down the road? It's not very far." I apologized and said I couldn't help because it was my dad's car and not my own, and I didn't feel comfortable without my father's permission. Mr. Unkempt did not like my answer, and his smile immediately turned tense and flatlined. Clearly upset, he became more insistent. "But it's just down the road. My leg is killing me, and it wouldn't even be far for you. I'll give you a cigarette." His persistence and sudden burst of hostility made my hair stand up. I firmly said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Dad car, and he has set rules." Absolutely BS. With 10 years of hospitality under my belt, I immediately offered him alternate logical ideas of what he could do to get where he needed to be. I even mentioned that maybe someone in the gas station we were outside of could help him or call him a ride. Each word I said made him increasingly irate, and he began curling his fingers into a fist, not in a threatening way, but like he was a toddler about to scream bloody murder for not getting in their way. He seemed to pause and size me up in a fleeting moment. I'm small and not very intimidating physically, so I told him I hope he makes it home safe, quickly unlocked my car, jumped in and locked myself inside. When looking up from locking the car door, I see him speed walking back across the street from the direction he originally came from. No limp, no awkward walk whatsoever, no distress or pain showing, even slightly. Just a normal speed walk of a physically well person, a rageful person. I knew I had dodged a bullet and felt pretty dumb for hanging around the city after dark alone. At this point, I didn't care about the traffic anymore, so I turned over my engine and hightailed it home in what ended up being an hour and 45-minute drive. But this time, the traffic was 100% worth the inconvenience. PSA: if you haven't heard it enough already, be careful who you give your attention to, especially when you're alone. Stay aware and always err on the side of caution, even when strangers seem harmless at first. Crazy bad acting hitchhiker guy, I hope you get the help you need, rather than the help you wanted, and I hope we never meet again. I went to a wedding of my friend Courtney about 2 days ago, and I still can't shake my mind over what happened. For context, I grew up in a very religious household and went to a church every Sunday, and Courtney is probably the only person from my old church that I still keep in contact with. The situation started at reception. Courtney was super excited to see me, and was definitely the only person who felt that way, judging from all the stares from the people from my old church. I sat down at my table and started playing something on my phone when some guy sat next to me. He said that the seating chart said that he was supposed to sit at my table, and introduced himself as the groom's friend, Anthony. He was pretty cute, so I spent a lot of time talking to him, and we really hit it off. He didn't seem to judge me for being an atheist, and seemed generally interested in me. When dancing started, they started to play Brown Eyed Girl, and he offered to dance with me. We danced together for most of the night until he left to go to the bathroom, and a little later I did too. When I came out, I saw that my purse wasn't at the table, which was weird because I swore I left it there. I was tired and thought I might have just left it in my car, so I went to the parking lot and into my car to look for it, and found it on the center console. I still thought it was weird because I really thought I had brought it in, but at that point it was pretty late in the night, so I didn't think too much of it. I danced some more and noticed Anthony was gone. I asked the groom, who said that he had gone home because he wasn't feeling good. Pretty soon, I felt sick too. I said bye to Courtney and went to my car. I put my keys in the ignition and looked behind me and saw something weird. It looked like something had dug down from behind my trunk. I took out my keys and looked back, and that's when I saw him. Anthony was crouched down in the trunk of my car. I started screaming and ran out, with him chasing after me. I went inside and told Courtney, who immediately told her husband, who walked me back to my car where Anthony was nowhere to be seen. Courtney's husband said he didn't see his car anywhere, so he probably left. I left and still felt sick to my stomach thinking about it. He could have easily gone home with me and killed me if I hadn't looked back. Courtney says she still feels terrible that she invited him and that she had no idea he would do that. I haven't stepped out of my house since because I'm worried that if I go out, he'll be waiting for me like he was before. Update. The last couple days have been kinda crazy, so I haven't had a chance to look, but thank you for all your advice that I wish I would have known about earlier. Unfortunately, my address was on my ID, and as I learned now, Anthony took photos of it. Anthony and the groom aren't exactly friends, but they know each other well enough for him to be invited. After the whole fiasco, the groom tried to text Anthony about it, but got no response. Anthony showed up at my job and was lurking around the parking lot before he ran off when he saw security. He left a note on my windshield that just says, "I'm watching." Security at my job has been notified about it, so hopefully I'm safe. I was told by other people that went to the wedding that he was introducing himself as my boyfriend and that he was planning on proposing. I'm currently trying to file a restraining order against him and feel horrified. He lives in my city and knows where I live, so I'm staying at my aunt's house as I speak. If anything else happens, I'll update. Trigger warning. I'm a 35-year-old woman, but this encounter happened when I was around 14 or 15 years old, so about 20 years ago now. But the memory is fresh and vivid, as though it happened yesterday. I hadn't even thought about the story in many years until I came across the subreddit, and after reading some of the other stories, my own personal memory of this story came flooding back. Everyone in my family, some still do, used to see this one family doctor for many years for all our medical needs. We'll call him Dr. D. We've been seeing this doctor for so long. He was even there at the delivery of my birth, where he held me in his arms when I was just a newborn baby. From then on, I would see him for everything. Every time I got sick, for all my shots, etc. So it was only natural that I would go see him the day I needed to get my first pap smear. I had just started to become sexually active for the first time with my very first boyfriend at the stage, and I had been taught in sex ed, as well as from other various sources, that once a female starts becoming sexually active, they also need to start getting the pap smear test done. For those who don't know, a pap smear, pap test, is a test or procedure done by a doctor to check for cervical cancer in women. The test is not painful in any way, but can feel a little bit strange, uncomfortable, and invasive, as it requires a swab to be inserted inside to collect the sample. Other than that, it's a very quick procedure that altogether takes no longer than a minute or two from start to finish. That last point is important to take note of for later in the story. It's important to note here that before arriving to my appointment, I was already in a state of feeling a little bit freaked out and uncomfortable with the whole situation. Because at 14, I was like most other girls my age, where I felt very awkward about my growing body, had poor self-image, would often wear baggy clothes to hide any signs of womanhood from the outside world, such as the breasts that were forming. So the idea that I had to do a test that required I strip from the waist down, sit on a bench with my legs wide open, only to have some random grown-up come right up in there and fiddle around down there, sounded to me like the last thing in the world I wanted to do, and I was already feeling very embarrassed about it. Even though I was told by many different people that if I wanted to, and if it made me feel more comfortable, I could request a female doctor to do the test, but for some reason, I had turned that option down. Something that I would regret later. I guess I thought in my head, it's okay. I'll just see Dr. D like I always do. I mean, he is my doctor. I've known him for years. It's only natural I continue to see him and treat this appointment like any other appointment. I guess I had managed to convince myself to stop being so silly. Everything was fine. And besides, he is a professional doctor who will approach the situation with professionalism and will conduct himself in a way that will not make me feel any more awkward than I already do. How wrong I was. So Dr. D tells me to take off everything from the waist down, to lie on the bed and put a white sheet over my lap and wait for him while he gets everything together. I do this, feeling a bit red in the face, but I do as he asks, hurriedly, as I'm impatient to get this over and done with quickly. When he does come around the curtain, he sits down on a low stool right beside my leg, whips off the sheet and looks at me with this big smile on his face. He proceeds to have a conversation with me about, well, I don't remember what about. However, what I do remember was, it wasn't at all relevant to the situation at hand, or anything to do with the test, or any medical information in relation to me whatsoever. I just remember that he had chosen that moment to talk about trivial things like, so how's the family going? Or, what level are you doing in school now? Things of that nature. Honestly, I wouldn't have been listening to anything he was saying at the time, as all I would be thinking about is me screaming at him to hurry up and get it over with. That I did not like having a chit-chat with him while my private bits are in his face. But if I had thought for a second that this ill-timed catch-up session would be the most uncomfortable thing to happen to me in that moment, I would be wrong. As he is chit-chatting away to me, as well as going back and forth between making eye contact with me and flashing me a wide smile, to looking down to my private areas with a deep, penetrating gaze, he all of a sudden wraps his hands right around my inner thigh, closest to where my knee is. He does so just gently, almost like he's just resting his hand there for a second. But it makes me do a little jump. He doesn't seem to notice though, and continues talking. And as he's talking, I'm realizing that he slowly started circling his thumb on my inner thigh into a slow gentle caress. Immediately, alarm bells start ringing in my head. I'm thinking to myself, what is he doing? The action was almost like he was trying to soothe or relax me in some way. Sort of how a mother might use her hand to do circular motions on her crying child's back in an attempt to soothe. But why? Was I maybe being outwardly obvious about how uncomfortable I was in the situation, despite my best efforts not to show? And even if that's obvious to Dr. D, is it normal for a doctor to do the soothing action on a patient? And on top of this, how much longer was the whole damn thing gonna take anyway? I thought it was meant to be a real quick procedure. That's when deep down I started to realize that something was very wrong with the situation, or that I started to sense his intentions weren't good or appropriate at all, because he started to move his hands slowly up my inner thigh towards my private area, still caressing me with his thumb and still gazing directly at me as he went. It was when his hand reached the destination that my legs started to shake uncontrollably. Not for any other reasons other than the fact that I was scared, and I just couldn't help myself from shaking in fear. Then 2 seconds later, the tears started to slowly form and roll down my face as it let out a little whimpering sound. Of course, Dr. D immediately noticed this, but doesn't at all stop or spring back like you hope he would in that situation. As though he might realize that what he was doing was wrong and decides to stop what he's doing. No. He just continues to do it more intensely and says to me, "Honey, you're shaking. What's wrong? Why are you feeling so nervous? Don't be nervous, honey. Just try to relax. Everything's fine." And just continues to caress me. It's almost like he believes his words and actions are actually helping me relax, when quite clearly it's doing the complete opposite. But for some reason, I don't say a word. I don't tell him to stop or back off. I don't move a muscle other than the uncontrollable shake. What's even more baffling about my behavior and reaction at this point, I even quickly try to wipe away and hide my tears from him so he doesn't see it, because for some reason, in that moment, I feel bad for him, because I'm worried that my tears and distress might be making his job harder in some way by me being a challenging or uncooperative patient. I can't explain why I thought or reacted this way, other than the fact that I was just a young 14-year-old girl who was freaking out and just didn't know what to do in this unsettling situation, especially because it was happening with someone I knew my entire life and had looked up to and trusted for a very long time. Anyway, it relieves me to say that he eventually did perform the test, and that the story doesn't end with any further graphic details of some sort of sexual assault or anything of that nature. He did, however, act completely oblivious to my distress throughout the whole thing. Acted the whole way through like he wasn't doing anything wrong, and that everything was normal. Oh, and remember how earlier I mentioned the test should only take 1 or 2 minutes at most to complete? I was on the table for 15 minutes with him, which might not be a long amount of time, but to me, it felt like years in that moment. Do you want to know what the worst part is? The moment I got home to my parents, I burst into tears, flung myself into their arms, and proceeded to tell my entire story. As freaked out as I was, within seconds I started feeling better, just knowing that I was back within my safety net of their presence, but also knowing that once I finished telling them what happened, that my parents would know what to do to fix the situation as well as offer me much needed comfort. But you know what? That's not what I got. What I got was being immediately thrusted out of their embrace and then straight away got the biggest telling off session of my life. They didn't believe a word I said. In fact, they got angry at me for being a troublemaker and making up stories about their trusted family doctor who they have known for years, and they knew for a fact wouldn't do anything that I was accusing him of. Then they told me to stop crying and immediately grounded me. I was in complete and utter shock, and to this day, I'm still not sure which one was worse. My doctor doing what he did, or my own family's reaction to the situation. Both experiences ended up hurting me deeply. So nothing ever came of the situation. I had to bottle it up inside and bury it all away, and he got away with it. The only thing I had in my power to do was make a decision to never see him again, which I haven't to this day. There have been many times where I had thought about reporting him to the police, especially fearing for the well-being of any other women patients in his care. But after how my parents reacted, I convinced myself the police probably wouldn't believe me either. If it came to me against him, I believed I would lose, so I stayed silent. I just truly hope that nothing awful has ever happened at his hands to anyone else after my experience. This is a story about how I was almost kidnapped by a coworker. Who knows what he was planning? You tell me. When I was in high school, I worked for a family-owned plant nursery and garden store. At the time this took place, I was a cashier and had been working there for 2 to 3 years. It's important to note that while I was in high school, I also attended a vocational school. The students at this vocational school came from all over the county, so it wasn't uncommon to have friends or know people from a few towns over. The place I worked was a perfect spot for a teenager to get a job. There were a good mix of adult employees and teen employees, and was a fantastic place to work. During summer one year, a boy started working there. For the sake of the story, I'll call him Connor. I recognized him from the vocational school we attended. We got a bit friendly at work, but I would have never considered him a friend, just a coworker, acquaintance. To be honest, I always had an off feeling about him. His mannerisms and actions just made me feel uncomfortable. But I had no reason to be mean or dislike him because he never gave me a reason to. It's hard to explain, but I just got a gut feeling of some kind. Before I go any further, I want to give a little more context about my job. To get to work and home, I took a bus or got a ride from my dad. The bus stop was about a 15-minute walk from my job, and the ride included a transfer at some point. If the buses were on time, it was a 25-minute commute. With rush hour and late hours and full buses, it could take 45 minutes plus. My dad only really drove me to and from on the weekends. After a few weeks, the more interactions with Connor, I started to get the feeling that he liked me. Whatever register I was on, there were multiple throughout the store. He would frequently make passes at, and sometimes even stop to chat for a minute. I always maintained a friendly coworker vibe, and did not do or say anything that may have made him feel different. One day, he asked if I wanted a ride home. I found this odd because I didn't think he had a car, as I always saw him skateboarding to work. I just declined, and we went about our day. The next weekend, he asked again, and again I declined. I asked if he had a car, and he said no, but he could ask to borrow a car from his parents and drive me home. I told him that wasn't necessary. I didn't mind taking the bus, and it just so happened that my dad was picking me up. This exchange probably happened 5 or 6 more times. Gotta give it to him. This boy has some persistence. Every time, I politely declined, but after the third time, it started to creep me out. In my high school teenage girl mind, I thought I was making it pretty clear that I wasn't interested in spending more time together. The last time he asked, I caved. He asked early in the morning. It just so happened that day, it was planned that my dad was going to pick me up from work, but he had told me on the way to work he wasn't going to be able to. I can't remember why. Something with his girlfriend, I'm sure. Anyway, I was feeling pretty bummed about having to walk and take the bus. If I remember correctly, it was supposed to thunderstorm all day. Connor came up to me as I was opening my register and said, "Hey, I finally got my own car." I was happy for him, as our conversations at work in the recent weeks were about his parents possibly bringing him car shopping soon. We talked about it and I congratulated him. Then he asked if I wanted to ride home that day. At this point, I was honestly fed up with that. I thought, what the hell? Maybe if I say yes and let him drive me home once, he'd stop asking, so I agreed. The day goes on and eventually lunch rolls around. I take my break and end up going to eat in the break room. When my break was almost over, another employee comes up and starts talking about how there was a couple cop cars in the parking lot with their lights on, and 2 officers went into the admin office. The rest of the story is what I pieced together from what the others told me. The local police made occasional drive-bys of my place of employment. The owners had some family friends who were officers, and they looked out for them. I guess on this day, that family friend cop did a drive-by and noticed a car in the parking lot that had been reported stolen that morning. He pulled over to investigate. I guess at this time, when another officer pulled up, a backpack was spotted, very crappily hidden behind a nearby tree. They do some investigating, found some things along with an ID, and went into the admin's office. The police officers tell them what they found, and Connor is called back to speak with them. It turns out Connor had stolen his uncle's car that morning. The backpack that was found had his ID in it, along with a rope, duct tape, and a switchblade. When he was called into the office, his uncle and parents were called. I guess his uncle said that he didn't want to press charges, which is why Connor didn't leave with the police. The boss asked Connor to leave for the day, and he did. I don't know if he was questioned about the contents of the backpack, and if he was, I don't know what his answers were, or the reasoning for having all those things. No one knew that he was going to give me a ride home that day. I hadn't told anyone. It wasn't until after things went down that I told my mom. Connor didn't work there long after that. The whole thing creeped me out so bad, I made it a point not to run into him at the vocational school. I remember using humor as a coping mechanism of the whole weird thing. Oftentimes, my mom and I would joke around about the guy who was going to try to kidnap me. I only remember this now because 2 or 3 years ago, I was scrolling through Facebook when I came across a shared memorial post. I recognized the face, and when I checked the profile, it clicked where I knew that face from. It was Connor. I had blocked this kid, and this clearly traumatizing experience out as well. I completely forgot about him, his name, that we worked together, what happened, and by this time it had been 8 years. After some digging, I learned that he had died from a drug overdose, and on his profile, it had his previous place of employment, one being my old job. This made me message my mom. I texted her and said something along the lines of, "Do you remember Connor?" "Are you serious?" "What? You mean the guy that was going to kidnap you?" That was all she had to say. I had a crazy flashback. I was so surprised and concerned that I could block out something like that. I'm clearly still trying to process it. It's been 2 years since the conversation with my mom. But anyways, this is my creepy encounter. So this actually happened about 2 hours ago. I, 26 female, and my boyfriend, 36 male, decided to go to the store to get oil. We have to go out 45 minutes just to get this out in a bad part of the city, but it's the only European store that actually has the stuff I grew up eating with. My family and I are from Ukraine, but I live in US, and it's difficult finding authentic places that have exactly what we had, and this is the only place I found that has it down to the exact brand. As we are driving, we are on a 3-lane road, which we need to get into one of those mid-section U-turn type of lanes. We get into the left turn lane, and a black car blitzes from the right lane through the middle lane to cut us off at the left lane, which my boyfriend and I were like, what the fuck? And then they stop at the green light for a U-turn. My boyfriend honks twice in a nice way, in case they were just on their phone, to let them know to go since it's green. They go forward and we go to the parking lot directly on our right to the store that we need to go to. The car that was in front of us, which is now in the far left lane, goes through another 2 lanes and drives onto the sidewalk to go into the parking lot where we're going into, and rides nearly on our bumper, pressing their horn the entire time we drove. My boyfriend eventually decided to stop a few feet further than the store instead of parking at it. At this point, I realized the car camera was not on. I can't remember the name in English. It's a camera that records in the front and back as you drive. I tapped it since it usually starts recording when it feels motion. It didn't turn on and we realized it somehow disconnected to his car. As he's trying to get the camera plugged back into the car, the black car pulls up and I see 3 guys looking 18 to 20 in there. All 3 were African American. They rolled on the window and the driver reaches for something, about to take it out. And I'm screaming at my boyfriend, just drive, go, just go. And my boyfriend slammed on the gas pedal and we drove off, and the black car does too. My boyfriend suddenly began doing donuts in the parking lot to get their car off our back while I'm screaming, oh God, the police, call the police, I need to call the police. I managed to dial 911 and he's doing the last donut and then suddenly began driving out of the parking lot. The black car was still chasing us out as I finally got an answer. When the police asked where we were, I blanked out and shuddered in panic that we were currently being chased, and my boyfriend yelled out the road that we were passing. He used to do Uber for 7 years and knows every street name by heart. Those guys kept going after us until we were about 3 to 4 blocks away from the police station, and they probably realized where we were going and swerved to a random road to our left. At some point we got disconnected, but the officer called me right back and stayed with us until we pulled into the station. We explained what happened and the officer was nice. He offered to escort us back to the store and follow our car just in case the guys were still there. We showed the skid marks. The officer said, nice, as a joke. It was all good. He did his paperwork and we grabbed the sunflower oil I wanted and had my boyfriend try authentic Slavic ice cream for the first time, which he agrees is 100% better than American. We decided to cut our day short, thanked the officer, and went home. My boyfriend said he was amazed on how quickly I made all the right decisions and was surprised I even called the police because he's aware I have a history of being sexually assaulted by 2 on-duty officers 4 years ago, and I've been terrified to speak to officers since then. But I was so terrified of getting shot, and my only priority was to have the police over so my boyfriend is safe if something happens to him. I was so terrified, my chest hurt, and I'm so happy we are safe. I genuinely hope I never run into those 3 guys ever again. Let's not meet. Trigger warning for this story, as it has animal cruelty and domestic abuse. I'm a female 22 at the time of writing this. I was almost killed by my ex-boyfriend, male, about 30 now. I will be changing names as to protect myself. I'll start with a quick backstory. At the time of the attack, I was 19, almost 20. My ex, Gavin, was 27. We had a big chow and a cat, the dog being his and the cat being mine. We lived in a 3-bedroom house, the layout being you walked in and to the right is the living room, in front of you is the dining room, and out to the left was the kitchen. Open concept living and dining room, closed kitchen. Down a longish hallway, we had a bathroom to the right and the main bedroom at the end of the hall on the right. Then 2 other bedrooms on the 2 other walls. A few months before, we had allowed our friend to stay with us, Lacey, and it didn't end well as she was just taking advantage of us. The week leading up to the attack, Gavin had gotten back from a work trip, which I believe was about 3 to 4 weeks away from home. The week he was back, he was completely out of it, not being able to complete a thought. I'd ask or tell him something, and less than 5 minutes later he'd completely forget, or just not have heard me, like he was just off in some other world. One day I was very frustrated with this, as I asked him to help me with chores, or for him to take out the garbage, only to be ignored. He said that if it continues, that he wanted me to slap him. We had gone out to dinner with his mom 2 days prior to the attack, and she was obviously very worried about him, as there was clearly something wrong. At the time, the only mental disorder he had, or was aware of, was OCD, which now I'm even more convinced that is not what he had by any means. The day of the attack, we had just gotten back from grabbing some takeout, and were sitting on the couch in the living room. I'd been painting my nails, and he was playing Mario Kart. He looked over at me and said, "Lacey put a curse on my family." I was dealing with my own poor mental health at the time, so I wasn't really in a space where I could be focusing on his. I wasn't really sure what to do, so I just suggested that he hop in a cold shower, as it helped him earlier in the week to just reset a bit. He walked into the bathroom and was muttering to himself, and it just felt so off. I don't know how to describe it. I didn't feel safe. I walked over and asked if I can call his mom for him maybe to invite her over for supper, kind of beating around the bush that I wanted her to come and help him. He looked at me and just started yelling that all he needed was me. I walked out and started for the living room as I was calling his mom. He came out of the bathroom naked and started yelling at Ollie, the dog, to discipline me and attack me. Mind you, he was a trained guard dog. At this point, I believe his mom had answered the phone and had heard what was happening. He started to call me Lacey and that I needed to pay for what I did. I ran into the bedroom with my phone, still with his mom on the line. He kicked down the door and smashed my head into our mirror closet door and threw my phone on the ground. He was screaming that he was going to kill me. I scrambled out of the bedroom door trying to get to the front door. As I was passing the kitchen, he got a hold of me and wrapped his arms around my throat, again saying that he was going to kill me. I remember looking over to the table and seeing my cat, Sterling, all puffed up. I've never seen him so scared. I was fighting not to go unconscious. I couldn't breathe. I clawed at him, just trying to get his arms off my throat. I remember starting to see black specks in my vision and thinking that I'm gonna die. What is he gonna do with my body? He asked me if I knew what it was like to be raped. This is the part where I'm not sure if he was actually out of his mind, as I had been raped before, and it was a year, that month. I was very open about how that had been affecting me. He threw me to the ground and put his foot over my head, as if to stomp on it. This was the only time I had seen his eyes throughout the entire attack. They were almost lifeless, his pupils so dilated you could barely see the iris. He was yelling over and over again, "Admit it, Lacey. You know what you did. Admit it." I just started apologizing, doing and saying anything I could to make him happy. It seemed to have worked, as I got the opportunity to scramble to my feet and race out the door. I just wish I left the screen door open. I ran from house to house in nothing but shorts and a sweater in February in one of the coldest provinces in Canada. I got to maybe 2 or 3 houses before I heard Ollie screaming. It's a sound that I can never get out of my head. I just dropped to the ground screaming and crying, "Gavin, leave him alone." I knew he killed the dog. At that point, a bunch of neighbors had heard the screaming and came running to help. An older couple called the police and brought me into their home, not knowing if they were putting their own lives at risk. My parents were living in a completely different province. Someone gave me their phone to call my mom. She was out for supper with some friends, and I just told her that Gavin killed the dog and tried to kill me. The police finally showed up after what seemed like hours. 5 to 6 cars, firearms out. They used a megaphone to tell him to come out with his hands up. He walked out naked and covered in blood. Once they had gotten him into the car, a police officer came to talk to me while the others searched the house. Shortly after, an officer came up and asked me how many dogs we had. I told him 1 and 1 cat. I asked if Ollie was still alive, and they told me that he was dead in the bathtub. Gavin had killed him in the living room, then brought him into the bathroom, filled up the tub, and put Ollie's body in it. I had asked about the cat, and they said they couldn't find him anywhere just yet. I was sure that he had killed my sweet boy too. Sterling was the only thing I could think about, and I went into panic and was no longer able to give them any more information, as I was basically in tunnel vision. "Where's my cat? I want my cat. Find my cat." The officers asked if there was any treats that would coax him out and where his hiding spots were. They ended up finding Sterling alive but scared, and they couldn't get to him as he was so scared and was attacking the officers. They had blocked off the worst of the scene, so they had me go in and get Sterling. As much as they blocked off, there was still so much blood, and the smell of the blood and feces were overpowering. Sterling was in the bedroom, on the bed, just crying. I scooped him up and asked the officers to find my vape. As I was walking out of the house, Gavin's mom had gotten out of her car. She asked me where Ollie was, and all I could say was, "Gavin killed him." She dropped to the ground and started bawling. I just walked past her and put Sterling in her car and sat in the front seat, not sure what to do, as I didn't want to go with her. At that moment, I hated her for what her son did to me and Ollie. To this day, I regret how I acted towards her. I had no right to be so cruel to someone who was also now suffering. My mom had gotten a hold of my aunt that lived a few towns over, so once I was done with the officers, I was to go with her. Once the police were done doing whatever it was that they were doing in the house, I had to go back in to get some clothes and such. They had forgotten to close the bathroom door. Luckily, I wasn't the one that walked by it at first. It was Gavin's mom. The sound she made was horrible. Eventually, my aunt came and I went with her. The next day, I had to go back to the house to get my things, and the police had gotten someone to take care of the body, but not the mess of blood and the body fluids and pee and poop. Half of the stuff, I didn't know what it was. His mom and sister had came to clean the house, blood everywhere, and a lot of broken furniture. His mom was kind enough to clean all my bathroom things and throw anything that couldn't be saved. Unfortunately, I had African black soap. That night, I washed myself with it, and when I looked down, I was washing myself with a bar of soap caked in Ollie's blood. 2 weeks later, Sterling and I were on a plane to my mom. The court case took 2 years, and I only found out later that he had gone to load his guns. For the longest time, I didn't want to know how he killed Ollie, but when they were going through the evidence, an officer mentioned a baseball bat. He only got 10 months house arrest. To this day, 2 years later, he still tries to contact me, blaming me for not getting him help. I think the worst part is I do partly blame myself. Not just for not knowing to get him help, but also for not leaving the door open for the animals, and for bringing that baseball bat into the house weeks prior because I was too lazy to walk to the shed. Let's never meet again, Gavin.